South Bank in the centre of London, very close to the Festival Hall. This is developed by the Coin Street Group. This is one of the very, very few examples of community-led housing. And I think probably the only one I could think of, community-led housing on such an important site in London. And there's an earlier phase over there, and this phase. And the Coin Street Cooperative has been very successful in establishing a community in an area where previously the expectation was just for commercial development. They are extremely capable group of individuals, completely dedicated to what they do, very good negotiators. And the negotiation on this development, this is housing, that's a restaurant, very good restaurant. And the deal that was negotiated was that after they had almost, the contract was ready to sign, they said, there's one last clause, and that is that the housing cooperative and everybody in the cooperative will have this restaurant for the night of the Millennium Night of 2000. That was the last thing they added as their negotiation for their party. But it's been very effective in establishing residential housing within central London.
It's also, by the way, nice historically. Does anyone know the OXO brand? It's a stock, gravy stock. It's a quite long established brand, and in the early days of regulating advertising, this was how they got around having an advert, huge advert on their building. They said, no, it's not an advert. It's just the windows in the tower. And this lights up at night. It's very nice. So everyone calls this the OXO Tower.
And this is the British Library. That's St Pancras, the building I mentioned earlier that was very nearly demolished in the 19th century. The British Library is, I think, a really interesting building historically, because I think, Mark probably told me if I'm right, it was conceived in the 1970s, and it was commissioned in the 1970s, and it was completed and opened less than 10 years ago. So it was almost 25 years in design and construction. And in many ways, it's almost it represents a style of public commissioning and public building which is almost unique in London from that period. It's becoming, I think, a building which is now beginning to work in the context of the whole regeneration that's been brought about by the new high-speed rail links coming into this part of London.
It's fascinating. It did have a birth of at least 20 years, and it's very interesting when you see the original drawings of this building, because the building design as a whole didn't change at all, and yet the original drawings, all of this was concrete, all of the windows were silver anodized aluminium, and all the roofs were metal roofs. So they just changed the styling of the building because they'd moved on 20 years, and that's what people expected then. So here we are with anyone who knows anything about the history of modern history of photography might recognise this. Would that be Elliot Erwitt or one of the American photographers? You see a lot of photographs of Manhattan with trucks driving past, and that's what this photograph is a reference to. So these again are architects saying, no, we're interested in how the city is every day, and we're not even going to tell you which our building is. Of course, it's this one. A completely different sensibility. in contrast to this one, which is another, we've seen a few amazing building by Richard Rogers, which is a good building, a good straightforward office building, but it clearly fetishizes construction. It's like so beautifully crafted. It's decorative, in fact. The way it's built is very luxury, very expensive, and it's decorative in the way it uses the expression of its construction. And that's been quite a tradition. We've got some amazing examples of really overexpressed technical construction.
Is the surrounding in the same manner? The buildings around it? No.
No. This is a very kitsch Terry Farrell building, and it's sitting in a fabric that was a new slice through post-Second World War that had a series of slab towers. Scandinavian idea of these slab tower planned Stockholm.
And the whole neighborhood does it look like this or not?
No. It doesn't.
But it has a similarity to Beaubourg.
Yes.
The same way of
absolutely.
making steps in front of the architect.
Yes.
This takes us through to the 1990s in London. I think probably the 1990s was a kind of interesting decade for London. It started with a very, very bad recession, and London was declining. There's this kind of burst of economic activities in the 1980s, huge amount of confidence, and like a bubble it burst. At the beginning of the decade, in the 1990s, it was actually a very depressing period in London. London was declining. Its population was going down, it was losing its influence. And its population hit the bottom. This is a population decline of about almost 100 years in about 1992, and then started to move up. And after the recession, what emerged was probably a kind of far more realistic confidence in London. And again, probably reflected in a lot of these buildings. Less showy, actually more confident, I think, in terms of their execution. Almost a kind of the development of a style which is far more cohesive than we've seen in the 1980s. And some of the projects started in the 80s are now being completed here. You can see, for example, the stations from the Jubilee line, the Underground line, Bermondsey by Ian Ritchie, Southwark by Richard McCormack, Canary Wharf by Norman Foster,
North Greenwich, yeah.
And West Ham by Van Hennigan.
Van Hennigan and Hayward.
So these kind of big infrastructure projects again have now been completed. The office development is now starting again, and we're beginning to see private commissions for kind of private houses, adopting and commissioning architects. And I think probably there's one thing that would make this a completely different exhibition from, let's say, New York or North America, is the relatively small number of private housing and private commissions you see. Certainly the beginning of this exhibition, though increasingly through the 1990s and over the last decade, you see more smaller scale commissions for private housing and for residential coming from good architects within London. And then as we move through the decade, we come to the idea of celebrating the millennium and two buildings in particular. Richard Rogers, the Dome on the Greenwich Peninsula, and then the London Eye. Both are still here, both are still major landmarks. Both were seen actually as rather temporary buildings. Well, I suspect both will still be here in 100 years' time. The Dome was a really strange project. The idea was to produce a building to mark the millennium, and then to work out what to do with it. And there was a government committee set up to try and work out what to put into this building which we've commissioned, which is a very strange way of doing things. And not surprisingly, it was, I think, it was a complete failure as a project. And became one of the great scandals. We had this building after the millennium. The exhibition wasn't particularly well attended. At the same time, I don't know if you have it here, probably upstairs, the Tate Modern refurbished an old power station as a modern art gallery. And that was at the same time as the Dome, as a kind of popular exhibition for the public, was failing. A new modern art gallery was bringing in 4.5, 5 million visitors from right the way across the social and the cultural spectrum. Since then, actually, this has become a success. It's been taken over as a music venue. But what this building did, which is what the Olympics will do, although it was a very costly building, a lot of the cost was actually sorting out the land contamination, putting the infrastructure in, and the construction of the Jubilee line, the underground line. And as a result of this, this area of East London is now beginning to slowly regenerate off the back of this building. The London Eye was conceived, again, purely as a temporary structure with a 4-year life. It breaks almost every planning rule in London. And now it is permanent. And one of the things that's always interested me, for a city that's supposed to be architecturally very conservative, we celebrate our past, we celebrate our historical legacy. If you look at any graphic of a skyline of London, what you will see, you'll see Big Ben, you'll see St Paul's Cathedral. Almost every other building you'll see, the Post Office Tower, the London Eye, Canary Wharf, some of the new office buildings, and now the buildings we put on our graphic logos, which I think demonstrates the fact that the architecture, a lot of which we're showing here in the exhibition, has actually captured the public imagination and is actually, in a very quiet way, celebrated by a lot of Londoners.
Upstairs?
Upstairs.
I